I was holding a cheeseburger in one hand and my daughter's inflatable flamingo in the other when a woman I barely knew marched into my backyard, screamed about a $500 fine, and threatened to confiscate my pool floaties. For a second, I thought it was some weird prank. Maybe my brother had hired a professional Karen to mess with me. But no. It was real. My jaw hung open as she jabbed a clipboard in my face, demanding immediate compliance with a rule I had never heard of. Behind me, the kids' laughter died down. My wife looked frozen, halfway through setting up the lemonade table. Even the dog stopped wagging his tail and stared at the woman like she had grown 3 heads. That was the day I realized suburban life was not just bake sales and quiet night. It was a battlefield, and I had just been drafted without my consent. Earlier that morning, the sun was shining bright, the smell of barbecue floated through the air, and I thought nothing could ruin my perfect Saturday. After months of hard work, I had finally finished upgrading our backyard. A new grill, a few lounge chairs, some landscaping, and the crowning jewel, the sparkling blue pool. It was modest, not Olympic-sized or anything, but it was ours. Paid for, permitted, and well within our property lines. I had even made sure to check the HOA regulations when we moved in. I thought I was safe. I thought wrong. When Karen stormed through the gate, she wore a neon pink blouse, a wide sun hat, and an expression that said she was ready to destroy someone's happiness today. She barely glanced at the pool before snapping a picture of it with her phone and scribbling something frantically onto her clipboard. I asked if there was a problem, still trying to be polite. That was my first mistake. She unleashed a tirade about unauthorized private use of community visible features. I had no clue what she was talking about. She waved a freshly printed HOA pamphlet in my face. Apparently, the board had passed an emergency amendment 2 weeks ago. If any part of a home feature, like a pool, a fountain, or even a fancy bird bath, could be seen from the street or the sidewalk, it had to be treated as a shared community visual amenity, and its use could be subject to HOA approval and regulation. I stared at her, blinking. I could not tell if she was serious or if I was stuck in some bizarre sitcom. Use of my own pool, in my own fenced backyard, was now grounds for fines because someone 3 streets over might glimpse it while walking their dog. My wife asked, as gently as she could, who had voted on this nonsense. Karen puffed up like a toad and proudly announced that she herself had spearheaded the initiative and that it had passed unanimously among the HOA board members, most of whom she had personally appointed. I tried reason. I tried humor. I even asked if this had anything to do with the time I had declined to donate to the HOA's annual garden gnome contest. Karen was not amused. She handed me a fine notice, complete with threats of additional penalties for non-payment, and stomped away, shouting over her shoulder that any further use of the pool would be documented and escalated to legal action. The afternoon was ruined. My daughter deflated her flamingo. The burgers got cold. Even the neighbors' kids, who usually hopped our fence to join the fun, decided to go home. As I sat in my patio chair, staring into the blue water that now felt like a forbidden treasure, a slow, burning anger started to build. Not the kind that makes you shout and throw things. No, this was the cold, calculating kind. The kind that plans. Karen thought she had one. She thought she could wave her clipboard around and everyone would bow. Maybe that had worked before, but not with me. I had grown up with 3 brothers. I knew a thing or two about digging in, about winning battles through stubbornness and cleverness. I was not going to take this lying down. I spent that evening measuring my property lines with an old tape measure and a bottle of lemonade. My wife watched from the window, probably wondering if I had finally snapped. But I had a plan forming in my head, a beautiful, delicious plan. Karen had made a fatal mistake. She had assumed that her rules trumped actual law. She had assumed that no one would fight back. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Later that night, while the neighborhood slept, I pulled out the dusty box of old blueprints and property deeds that the previous owner had left behind. I combed through every document, highlighting clauses, marking easements, studying setback requirements. The more I read, the more I grinned. My backyard was a sovereign nation compared to the tiny strip of land the HOA technically governed. They had power over public-facing properties, sure. Front yards, maybe. But my backyard? Behind a legal fence? It was mine, completely and utterly. The next morning, I called my old college buddy, Todd, who had gone to law school and now made a fortune protecting small businesses from HOA harassment. Todd laughed so hard when I told him the story that he nearly dropped his coffee. After a few minutes of him catching his breath, he confirmed what I had already suspected. They had no legal standing to regulate what I did in my backyard unless it was a clear violation of city ordinances, which it was not. Armed with knowledge and a growing sense of mischief, I started making plans. Big ones. Plans that involved more than just fighting the fine. Plans that would make sure Karen, and anyone else who thought HOA power was absolute, would learn a lesson they would not soon forget. The next phase of my retaliation would not involve angry shouting or endless letters. No, it would be much more satisfying. It would be silent, strategic, and utterly devastating in its simplicity. If Karen wanted to declare war over the mere sight of my pool, then I would give her exactly what she feared most. A pool she could never see or touch again. The next morning, fueled by 2 cups of strong coffee and a sense of righteous fury, I started making phone calls. If Karen wanted to play games, then I was ready to build a fortress so solid and untouchable that even her clipboard would tremble in fear. The first call was to my old friend Todd again. I explained my plan and he chuckled, giving me a few legal tips to make sure everything stayed bulletproof. Then I reached out to a few contractors in town, men who had experience dealing with tricky HOA boundaries. Within a couple of hours, I had a team lined up and ready to transform my backyard into a fortress. They thought it was hilarious when I explained why. One of them even said it was the best job request he had gotten in months. By noon, my backyard was buzzing with activity. Trucks pulled up with wood panels, concrete posts, and tools that looked straight out of a medieval castle build. I had decided on a privacy fence that would completely surround the pool area, much taller than the standard HOA regulations allowed, but here was the loophole Karen did not know about. The HOA had jurisdiction over what could be seen from the street, but the pool itself was deep inside my backyard, hidden from public view. As long as the fence was not visible from the front sidewalk, they had no say over how tall it was. The guys got to work measuring, digging, and setting the first post. Every thump of a hammer felt like sweet music to my ears. Every plank nailed in place felt like a small but powerful act of freedom. Around 2 in the afternoon, I heard the screech of tires. I looked up from where I was helping hold a fence panel in place, and saw Karen stomping down the sidewalk, her wide sun hat bobbing furiously. She marched straight up to the crew leader and demanded to know what was going on. Before he could answer, I stepped forward with a wide grin and a folder of city permit paperwork in my hand. Karen barely glanced at it before launching into a tirade about aesthetics, property values, and community standard. I calmly pointed out that everything we were doing was fully compliant with the city ordinances and that her HOA regulations had no power here. She sputtered like a broken engine, waving her clipboard in the air, but the contractors kept working. She threatened to call the police. I encouraged her to do so, smiling politely. After a moment of standing there, red-faced and vibrating with anger, she spun on her heel and stormed off. The fence rose quickly. By the end of the day, it was already impossible to see the pool from anywhere outside the property. We had used thick cedar panels, sealed against weather, and reinforced the posts with concrete so the whole structure would withstand any storm, nosy neighbor, or angry HOA president. But I was not done yet. I had plans for the gate too. The next morning, I ordered a top-of-the-line digital keypad lock system. No keys, no manual latches, just a sleek steel gate that only opened with a code. I programmed it with a random 6-digit number, and shared it only with my wife and kids. Even if Karen wanted to inspect or snoop, she would be staring at a locked fortress wall with no way inside. Installing the lock took a little extra time, but it was worth every second. Watching the gate swing closed and hearing the satisfying beep as it locked itself was one of the most beautiful sounds I had ever heard. I stood there for a while, just admiring it, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. It was not just about the pool anymore. It was about making a statement. My home was mine. My family was mine. My peace was mine. And no clipboard-wielding tyrant was going to take it away. The next weekend, we decided to have a small family pool party to celebrate. Nothing fancy, just some close friends, some good food, and a lot of laughter. As we floated around in the water, I noticed a few heads peeking over fences here and there, trying to catch a glimpse of what was going on. Karen herself made a few laps around the perimeter of the property, probably hoping to find some violation to report. But all she saw was a solid, beautiful fence and a securely locked gate. At one point, she stood on the sidewalk glaring at us for a full 10 minutes before finally giving up and stomping back to her house. That evening, as the sun set and the kids chased fireflies around the backyard, I sat by the pool with a cold drink in hand and reflected on everything that had happened. Karen had tried to bully me with ridiculous rules. She had tried to shame me into compliance. She had underestimated how much fight I had left in me. She thought she was the queen of the neighborhood, that everyone would bow to her clipboard and her loud voice. But she had forgotten one very important thing. When you push a good man too far, he stops playing by your rules. He builds his own. I knew it was not over yet. Karen was not the kind to take defeat gracefully. I could already feel the next battle brewing. There would be letters, complaints, maybe even attempts to sabotage or escalate the situation. But I was ready. I had documentation, legal backup, and most importantly, I had something she could never take away again. My right to enjoy my home in peace. As the stars came out and the cicadas started singing, I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Let her come. Let her bring her fines and her threats and her meetings. I was not afraid anymore. I had built my wall, locked my gate, and fortified my peace. Karen could bang on the door all she wanted. She was never getting in again. It did not take long before Karen made her next move. About a week after the fence was finished and the keypad installed, I noticed a white envelope taped to my front door. The words HOA Notice of Violation were printed in bold letters across the front. I sighed, pulled it down, and opened it right there on the porch. Inside was a list of absurd complaints. Noise violations for laughter during the pool party. Property devaluation concerns due to an excessively tall fence. Failure to maintain neighborhood harmony, whatever that meant. They had even thrown in a warning about unauthorized construction, even though my permits were in perfect order. It was clear what this was. Karen had gone digging through every possible regulation and thrown the entire kitchen sink at me, hoping something would stick. I walked back inside, tossed the notice on the kitchen table, and poured myself a coffee. My wife looked at the paper and raised an eyebrow. More nonsense, she asked. I nodded and smiled. They were desperate. They knew they could not touch the pool, so now they were grasping at anything they could. I spent the next hour documenting everything. I took pictures of the fence from every angle, scanned my permits into a file, saved copies of every ridiculous violation notice, and even set up an additional camera aimed at the front of the house just in case they tried anything sneakier. I was not going to get caught off guard. Not this time. The very next day, 2 men in official-looking polo shirts showed up at the gate. They had clipboards and stern expressions and announced they were there to conduct a property inspection on behalf of the HOA. I almost laughed. Karen must have convinced them to come harass me in person, thinking I would be intimidated. I met them at the gate, smiled politely, and asked to see their authorization. They fumbled around with their clipboards and handed me a document that, upon close inspection, turned out to be nothing more than a request, not a demand. I politely informed them that no inspections were permitted without a court order or prior arrangement with my attorney. When they insisted, I pointed to the new sign I had posted next to the gate. Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. They stood there for a few more awkward seconds, probably hoping I would change my mind. When I did not, they eventually shuffled back to their car and drove off, leaving behind a fresh surge of satisfaction in my chest. I was winning, and they knew it. But Karen was not done yet. That evening, another notice showed up in my mailbox. This time it accused me of running a commercial event space out of my home, citing the pool party as evidence. It was laughable. I had pictures, videos, and a guest list that showed it was a private family event. No tickets sold, no public advertising, nothing remotely commercial about it. Still, the accusations kept coming, piling up like leaves in a storm. I decided it was time to turn defense into offense. I attended the next HOA meeting, something I had avoided for months. I walked into the stuffy community center with a folder full of documents under my arm and a calm, patient smile on my face. Karen was already there, holding court at the front of the room like some kind of self-declared queen. Her smile faltered the second she saw me. "Good evening," I said, taking a seat near the front. A few neighbors gave me curious glances. Word had apparently spread about the battle brewing between me and Karen. When the time for open discussion arrived, Karen wasted no time launching into a long, self-righteous speech about how my actions were damaging the community spirit, lowering property values, and setting a dangerous precedent. She painted me as a rogue neighbor, a rebel without a cause, a threat to everything good and pure about suburban life. When she finally ran out of breath, I stood up slowly, opened my folder, and began to speak. I started with the facts: my permits, my compliance with city codes, the legal limits of HOA authority. I showed photographs of the fence, the pool, and the backyard from public vantage points, proving that nothing violated visibility standard. I read aloud excerpts from the HOA bylaws that specifically protected backyard modifications from interference. I even played a short video clip from my security cameras showing the so-called inspectors attempting to trespass without proper authorization. The room was silent when I finished. Even Karen looked rattled. I closed my folder, thanked everyone for their time, and sat down. A few board members whispered among themselves, clearly unsure how to proceed. Finally, the HOA president, an elderly man who rarely spoke above a mumble, cleared his throat and said that further review was needed before any additional action could be taken. In other words, Karen's crusade had hit a wall. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me quietly to offer their support. Turns out I was not the only one tired of Karen's overreach. She had been bullying people for years, but no one had ever pushed back this hard before. I shook their hands, accepted their kind words, and walked back home with my head held high. But I knew Karen was not the kind of person to back down easily. Losing in public would only make her more desperate. She would find another angle, another scheme, another way to try to claw back her lost control. I could feel it coming like a storm building on the horizon. I had to stay ready, stay vigilant, and most importantly, stay one step ahead. Because for people like Karen, it was never about rules or fairness. It was about power. And once you challenged that power, they would do anything to get it back. I sat by the pool that night, watching the reflection of the stars ripple across the water, and thought about the next move. If Karen wanted to escalate, I would be ready. She had played her hand. Now it was my turn to raise the stakes. The storm hit 2 weeks later, and it came exactly as I had predicted, not with a roar but with a sly, calculated move meant to blindside me. A thick envelope arrived in the mail bearing the official letterhead of the county courthouse. Inside was a summons. Karen had filed a civil lawsuit against me on behalf of the HOA, accusing me of property devaluation, public nuisance, and community disruption. It was a laughable stretch, but it was also a serious escalation. If she could not beat me with fines or meetings, she was going to try to bleed me dry through legal costs. My wife found me standing on the porch staring at the letter. She did not say anything. She just put a hand on my shoulder, a silent reminder that we were in this together. The next morning, I called Todd. He chuckled when I told him the news but quickly sobered up when he heard the details. He told me not to worry. We had more than enough evidence to shut this down, but we had to do it right. He filed a response with the court immediately, requesting dismissal based on lack of merit and malicious prosecution. We also filed a countersuit for harassment, legal fees, and emotional distress. Karen had walked straight into a trap of her own making. If she wanted a legal battle, she was going to get one, but it was not going to go the way she thought. While the paperwork made its way through the system, I decided it was time to shore up my defenses even more. I hired a private security company to assess my property and make sure there were no vulnerabilities Karen could exploit. They installed additional cameras, updated the locks, and even placed official no trespassing signs in key locations. Everything was documented, dated, and double-checked against local laws. There would be no gray areas, no technicalities she could twist in her favor. A few days later, my wife called me to the window. Across the street, Karen stood with two other women, pointing at our house and whispering furiously. I recognized them as members of the HOA board, or at least what was left of it after several members had quietly resigned following the last meeting. It was clear that Karen was rallying her troops, trying to turn the neighborhood against me. But something was different now. As they stood there gossiping, several other neighbors walked by, gave them a wide berth, and even shot Karen a few dirty looks. The tide was turning. People were tired of the drama, tired of the constant tension she brought with her wherever she went. The court date arrived faster than I expected. We sat in a small courtroom, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, while Karen and her lawyer laid out their case. It was a mess. They had no solid evidence, just vague complaints and emotional arguments about neighborhood values. When it was our turn, Todd calmly presented our permits, our documentation, the video footage of Karen trespassing, and the countless notices that amounted to harassment. He spoke clearly, methodically, dismantling their case piece by piece until even the judge looked annoyed that his time was being wasted. When the ruling came down, it was swift and brutal. The judge dismissed Karen's lawsuit with prejudice, meaning she could not refile it. He ordered her to pay our legal fees and fined her personally for abuse of the legal system. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red as the verdict was read. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but her own lawyer shook his head and motioned for her to sit down. It was over. She had lost. Outside the courthouse, I shook Todd's hand and thanked him. He clapped me on the back and said he had not had that much fun in a courtroom in years. As I walked to my truck, I felt lighter than I had in months. The war was not just won. It was obliterated. Karen had thrown everything she had at me and failed spectacularly. That evening, we celebrated quietly at home. No big party, just a peaceful dinner by the pool, the way it was always meant to be. My daughter floated lazily on her flamingo, my wife sipped lemonade, and the dog dozed in the grass. For the first time in a long time, the backyard felt like a sanctuary again. No clipboard, no threats, no fear. Just family, laughter, and the simple joys we had fought so hard to protect. But I knew one final step remained. Karen might have been defeated legally, but she was still president of the HOA. As long as she held that title, she could continue to make life miserable for anyone who crossed her. So I gathered my neighbors, the ones who had quietly supported me, and proposed a plan. We would call a special election to replace the HOA board. It was within our rights according to the bylaws. We just needed enough signatures to force a vote. The response was overwhelming. People came out of the woodwork to sign. Even those who had previously been too scared to speak up now found their courage. Karen had overplayed her hand, and the community was ready to take back control. Within 2 weeks, we had more than enough support. The election was scheduled, and the results were inevitable. Karen and her closest allies were voted out in a landslide. A new board was installed, made up of reasonable, community-minded neighbors who actually cared about improving the neighborhood instead of micromanaging it. When the final votes were counted, Karen stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, her face a mask of bitterness. She did not speak. She did not congratulate the winners. She simply turned and left without a word. Watching her walk away felt better than any pool party ever could. I went home that night and stood in my backyard, looking at the fence, the gate, the lights twinkling in the water. I had fought not just for my right to enjoy my property, but for the spirit of the community itself. And for the first time it truly felt like home. With Karen finally removed from the HOA leadership, life in the neighborhood took on a different tone almost overnight. It was as if a heavy cloud had lifted, and the air itself felt lighter. Neighbors who used to scurry indoors at the first sign of a clipboard now lingered on their porches, chatting easily. Kids played in the streets without fear of someone snapping photos and filing noise complaints. Lawns grew a little wilder, gardens a little more colorful, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood started to feel alive again. I spent the first few days after the election just soaking it all in. Every morning I would walk out to the backyard, unlock the gate with a soft beep, and smile as I stepped into my own private paradise. The pool glittered under the sun, the fence stood tall and strong, and the keypad on the gate was a silent but powerful reminder that the days of harassment were over. But I was not one to forget easily. Victory tasted sweet, but I knew that part of truly reclaiming my space meant celebrating in a way that brought everyone together. So I decided to throw a block party, a real one, open to everyone who had endured Karen's tyranny. I printed flyers and dropped them off door to door, inviting every household to come enjoy food, music, games, and of course, a chance to take a dip in the now legendary pool. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. People signed up to bring dishes, musicians volunteered to perform, and local businesses even donated prizes for a raffle. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been waiting for an excuse to let loose and have fun. The day of the party dawned clear and bright. Balloons lined the sidewalks, banners hung from porch rails, and tables groaned under the weight of homemade casseroles, desserts, and barbecue. I had set up a sound system by the pool, playing a playlist filled with summer anthems and feel-good classics. The gate was open, welcoming everyone who wanted to join. By noon, the place was packed. Kids splashed in the pool, teenagers set up a volleyball net, and adults lounged in folding chairs swapping stories about the bad old days under Karen's rule. Laughter echoed off the houses, mixing with the scent of grilled burgers and fresh-cut grass. It was pure, unfiltered joy. At one point during the afternoon, someone suggested we have a ceremonial ribbon cutting for the pool gate. They produced a big, gaudy pair of scissors and a roll of bright red ribbon. I laughed but agreed. We tied the ribbon across the gate, and with a mock-serious speech about freedom, I cut it to wild cheers and applause. Someone handed me a megaphone, and before I could even think about it, I shouted out a new unofficial motto for our little corner of the world. Private pool, offense-free zone. The crowd roared with laughter, and someone even made a quick sign with the slogan, hanging it proudly above the gate. Throughout the day, I caught glimpses of Karen peering out from behind her curtains, her face a tight mask of bitterness. She never stepped outside, not once. The irony was delicious. Here was a celebration of community, the very thing she had claimed to protect, happening without her and because of her removal. It was a reminder that true leadership does not come from enforcing rules with an iron fist but from nurturing the spirit of the people you serve. As the sun dipped low and fairy lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the yard, I found myself sitting by the pool, a plate of homemade pie in hand, just watching. The kids were winding down, the adults were relaxing with drinks in hand, and a soft breeze carried the sound of easy conversation across the grass. This was what we had fought for. This was what had been at stake all along. Not just the right to swim in peace, but the right to live without fear, without unnecessary rules strangling the simple pleasures of life. Later that evening, a few of the new HOA board members pulled me aside. They wanted to thank me for standing up when it mattered, for pushing back when it would have been easier to roll over. They admitted they had been scared too, once, but seeing someone challenge the system had given them the courage to act. I accepted their thanks humbly, knowing that it had not been about being brave so much as being stubborn. Sometimes the biggest victories come simply from refusing to give up. The party wound down slowly, with families trickling back to their homes under the starlit sky. I helped stack chairs and gather up empty plates, feeling a deep, bone-deep satisfaction settle over me. We had done something special. We had turned a battlefield into a celebration ground. We had taken back our neighborhood, not with anger or lawsuits alone, but with unity, laughter, and a refusal to let fear dictate how we live. As I finally locked the gate for the night and turned off the lights by the pool, I paused for a moment. The water was still, reflecting the moon overhead, the fence casting long shadows across the grass. I thought about the journey we had been through, the battles fought, the small victories accumulated until they added up to something much bigger. It was not just about a pool anymore. It was about standing your ground, knowing your rights, and fighting for the kind of life you believed in. It was about community, family, and freedom. I turned and walked back into the house, the sounds of the party still echoing in my ears, and I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. Stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. The weeks that followed the party felt like the beginning of a new era for the neighborhood. The once strained and suspicious atmosphere had shifted into something lighter, almost festive. It was not just about the pool or the HOA leadership anymore. It was about the spirit that had been reclaimed, the sense of ownership and belonging that no amount of rules or fines could ever replace. People were planting flowers in their yards without worrying about getting a nasty letter. Kids played louder and longer, and neighbors waved more often when they drove by. It was a small, almost invisible transformation, but it was real and it mattered. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to shrink with each passing day. She stopped attending neighborhood events, stopped hosting her infamous HOA meetings, and eventually stopped even making eye contact with anyone. Her power had evaporated, and with it, the fear she had once wielded like a weapon. Rumors started circulating that she was planning to move, that the house she had once lorded over like a throne was now up for sale. Part of me thought it was sad, but a bigger part of me thought it was fitting. Actions had consequences. You could only push people so far before they pushed back. One afternoon, as I was trimming the hedges along the side of the house, a realtor's sign went up in Karen's yard. I watched from a distance as she supervised its placement with a tight, grim expression. There was no fanfare, no farewell, just a quiet retreat. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate. I simply nodded to myself and went back to my work. The real victory was not in her leaving. It was in the life we had rebuilt without her. A few days later, a for-sale open house was announced. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wandered over to take a look. The irony was almost too much to bear. The listing boasted proximity to a peaceful community, easy access to amenities, and of course, views of a beautiful private pool. I had to chuckle at that. Karen, who had tried to claim my pool as a community resource, was now using it as a selling point to escape the very community she had tried to control. As I walked through the open house, pretending to be just another interested buyer, I caught Karen watching me from the kitchen. She did not say a word. She did not need to. Her silence spoke volumes. She had lost not just the battles, but the war. I tipped an imaginary hat to her and moved on, leaving her to stew in her regrets. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. The new HOA board proved to be reasonable and supportive, focusing on community improvement projects like park renovations and neighborhood events rather than nitpicking individual homeowners. There were still occasional disagreements, of course, but they were handled with respect and understanding rather than threats and fines. It was what a community was supposed to be. One evening, sitting by the pool with my family, I thought about everything that had happened. It had started with a clipboard and a fine, a ridiculous claim that had nearly spiraled into a nightmare. But through persistence, unity, and a little creativity, we had turned it into something better. We had not just defended our rights, we had reclaimed our happiness. My daughter splashed water at the dog, who barked joyfully and chased his tail. My wife laughed, setting down her book to join in the fun. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the warm evening air against my skin, and realized that this was the real reward. Not the fence, not the legal victories, but the simple, unshakable peace of knowing that we were free to live our lives without fear. As the stars began to appear in the sky, I thought about what I would say if someone asked me about the whole ordeal. I would tell them it was never really about the pool. It was about standing up when it mattered. About refusing to let bullies dictate the terms of your happiness. About choosing to fight, not because it was easy, but because it was right. A few weeks later, I heard that Karen's house had sold. A young family with 2 little boys moved in, and within days, the sounds of laughter and play filled the street once more. I introduced myself, welcoming them to the neighborhood. They seemed surprised by how friendly everyone was, almost as if they had expected something different. I smiled and told them they had arrived at the perfect time, just as the neighborhood was starting a new chapter. They thanked me, and one of the boys asked if he could come swim in the pool sometime. I laughed and said of course, but only with an official invitation. We shook hands and parted ways, a simple gesture that felt like a victory in itself. That night, as I closed the gate and heard the familiar beep of the lock engaging, I allowed myself one last look back at everything we had built and protected. The pool shimmered in the moonlight, the fence stood tall and proud, and the house behind me felt more like home than ever before. Sometimes the battles you do not want to fight are the ones that end up meaning the most. Sometimes the things you think you are protecting are just symbols of something much bigger. Freedom, community, family. I smiled to myself, feeling the cool night air on my face, and knew without a doubt that we had won more than just a battle against an HOA. We had won the right to live our lives with joy, on our terms, surrounded by people who valued the same. I turned off the porch light, stepped inside, and closed the door behind me. Whatever challenges came next, I was ready. Because once you learn how to stand your ground, once you taste what it feels like to protect what matters most, there is no going back. And for me, that was the sweetest victory of all.